Good afternoon and welcome to our special Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, May 31st, 2021. It's 5 o'clock, so we'll start with amendments to the agenda. Seeing none, disclosure of monetary interest, none. So we have no delegations tonight or adoption of minutes. For CIO directors reports, we'll start with Mayor Panko with a special statement today.
Thank you, Chair McGuire. You may have noticed that the town has lowered its Canadian flags at half-mast in solidarity with federal government, municipal governments, and provincial governments across the province in memory of the 215 young lives that were lost at the Kamloops Residential School and the unmarked graves that were recently discovered. Obviously, this is very solemn news. It's a very sad state of time in Canada, in recognition that the atrocities that were brought upon our Indigenous population going back well over 100 years ago. And the school opened along with the dozens of others. Of course, we know the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has done incredible work to try and bring this to the forefront. And we as Canadians all have a responsibility to carry this message forward and do all we can to ensure that our First Nations, Inuit, Métis, Indigenous population are all recognized, supported during these challenging times. So the flags will remain at half-mast right now for an indefinite period. You'll also notice that many of us are wearing orange today, in honor of Orange Shirt Day, which usually happens, I believe, in September. And it relates, of course, to residential school survivors. So, and those who lost their lives in that environment. So we stand together today. We recognize the atrocities brought on by the Government of Canada, the church is involved, and we will all commit to doing our part to heal and to help move this issue forward, ensuring that these children and others who we fear will be found will not be forgotten.
Thank you, Mayor Panko. So we'll go now to CIO Morris for a roll call of staff.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have a lighter number this evening than normal, given the agenda. So we have with us Director Costello, Director Manhire, and Deputy Clerk Nadine Bennett.
Great, and I'm assuming there's no other directors reports tonight?
None this evening, thank you.
Great, so we'll move right to 8.1, our procedural bylaw with Director Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. And is that going up for everybody or no?
Yep.
You've got it up there?
Yep.
Okay. So this evening we're bringing forward the procedural bylaw. It was brought forward about a month ago for council to review and ponder and reflect on it and bring any questions forward. So this evening I've done a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. There are things that are new in our procedural bylaw. For Councillor Dwyer, it's probably she's probably used to some of these procedures now in the town of Carleton Place. And actually, I stole a couple documents from their website, but they're new to us here in Smiths Falls. So I think all of you are aware that the procedural bylaw is legislated. Just trying to get to move my screen here. Legislated in the Municipal Act that every local board, council, or committee have a policy in effect regarding the proceedings of their meetings, and they also must speak to public notices of meetings. So the areas of interest for all of us this evening, we've extended the definition section in this bylaw. We've added more definitions to the roles, responsibilities, and that's more or less because of the amendments to the Municipal Act over the years since the previous bylaw was adopted. We've also put in more definition and clarity regarding committees of council, task force, and advisory boards. We've given more flexibility to change a meeting location, which became very apparent in the last couple years, having to have accessible locations. We've added a provision regarding a striking committee, which is a decision that council will have to make whether they like that provision or not. If they don't, we can certainly remove it. Re-amended the agenda layout because, of course, we wanted to include the consent agenda portion. The consent agenda, as you'll see, has been included in the draft agenda format. We've also asked in the layout of the agenda that we're going to have bi-weekly updates from committee and boards. And I believe it was Councillor Alfred who brought this up quite a while ago about in council reports about having the need for council members to give updates on the various boards and committees they speak on. So it's in addition to the committee, the whole agenda, if council's receptive to that. We've also added a petition policy, as well as another item that council will have to give direction to staff with the e-participation, whether they want to participate in e-participation or we leave that out of our procedural bylaw. I'm not going to go through all of these. We'd be here all night. I think you're all acutely aware of what the roles of head of council and the roles of the members of council are. This was something that we went through during your orientation and something I think you're just all innately familiar with. Same with the role of acting mayor. This really hasn't changed from what we currently do. The acting mayor appointments are made alphabetically and rotate on a monthly basis. If the mayor is absent, we revert back. As well, the preside over council meetings if the mayor is absent, as well as can sit in for the mayor in public relations events. The role of the CAO, again, this is something that's in the Municipal Act. The CAO is appointed by bylaw to discharge the duties that council put in front of them in a non-partisan manner and aid members in carrying out their duties. They're also mandated to attend council meetings and exercise general control and management of the affairs of the town. The role of the clerk, again, is put forward in the Municipal Act, what we are supposed to do or what we shall do. We shall take minutes without any comment, just without note or comment. We ensure implementation of council's direction. We also, by our clerkdom, I guess I should call, we also act as the Municipal Freedom of Information and Privacy Act coordinator. As well as a note, even though it's not in the Municipal Act, it is under the Municipal Elections Act that the clerk acts as the returning officer. So that we've sped through the first couple sections of the procedural bylaw because it's all things that aren't new to any of us. We've also went into more detail in the procedural bylaw about how questions are addressed, as well as speaking protocol at meetings. How materials are distributed and at what time they should be distributed so that you all have them ahead of time for the meetings, and rules of order. Section 6 is where we went into a little more detail about committees of council structure and reporting. As you all know, we've had, in the last couple of years, we've had a number of we had the Housing Task Force, the Housing Advisory Committee, the Racism and Discrimination Task Force, as well as the Accessibility Committee. So we're keeping it open so that council can have these committees or have the draft terms of reference for these committees, as well as it spells out what has to be in the terms of reference. Currently, there's nothing in our procedural bylaw that mandates these committees or members to have a terms of reference. It's very handy, kind of like the strategic priorities you have. It kind of is the path for these advisory boards and committees to gauge what they should be doing and when they should be doing it. So we have added some provisions for that. As well, we've added the provisions in this bylaw that mimic the provisions in our committee policy bylaw or committee appointment bylaw that was passed, I'm going to say probably about 7 years ago now. So this mimics that policy. All committee appointments are with the term of council. We changed that probably about 10 years ago. I think they used to have 2-year appointments, but we decided that that was too much. We put in terms of reference for advisory committees and task force A perfect example, like I said, was the one we just had with the Housing Advisory Committee. That just came to the council floor not too long ago. We've held our inaugural meeting, but this just spells out what needs to be in their terms of reference and a reporting relationship with the chair. And again, this is something you're all very familiar with, is the council and committee structure. We have our inaugural meeting. The inaugural meeting always follows the municipal election, and it's held the first Monday in December in the council chambers. We've put our provisions in here, which were in our previous bylaw, about where and when we hold our council and committee of the whole meetings, as well as special meetings and emergency meetings being all of the chair, or the mayor, excuse me. Some general provisions, again, that we're all familiar with, is that if there's a holiday, the meeting is held on the next day following the holiday. If there's a need to relocate a meeting, we may relocate a meeting due to special circumstances just by giving 48 hours notice. Currently, we require a resolution of council. What else is in? We've also mandated when the committee agendas shall be posted. I know that's been on council's mind that they'd like the materials a bit sooner. So we have put in the draft bylaw that committee agendas and materials will be made available by 4 p.m. Thursday prior to the meeting, and that they will be posted on the town's website. Now here's the provision that will need some council direction. This is regarding a striking committee. So at the inaugural meeting, the mayor shall appoint a striking committee composed of the mayor and 2 members of council who received the most votes in the municipal election for that term. The striking committee shall meet and prepare a report recommending initial appointments to existing committees and task force, as well as local boards and external organizations. Those would be the role that some of you play as representatives on the various task force or the hospital board, police services board. That's what that section B is indicating. So if council is receptive to that idea, that could be implemented, or if council isn't receptive to that idea, we could still do what we've been doing for the last couple of years, we would still have the applications. However, we would vet them with the staff resource and bring those forward to full council at an in-camera session for you to make those decisions. And of course, the appointment is an open session at a council meeting. So that's open for discussion if council is receptive to a striking committee. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that now, Mr. Chair, if you'd rather go through the presentation.
I think it'd be best if we maybe go through the presentation and then we can, there's 2 parts, I think. One's the new bylaws prepared, and then the other's the report that's got some recommendations in it. So maybe if we started with the report.
Absolutely.
The discussion there, and then we could go through it kind of section by section. If,
okay, I'll keep going then.
If that's the will of council or committee.
Highlights of the closed session. There's been nothing in this section that we've really changed. We've elaborated more from what was in our current bylaw regarding in camera. Again, it pertains not only to committee of the whole and council meetings, but it also extends to local board and committees, and that's in the previous bylaw as well. So the committee of the whole consent report, this is something that council's had on their wish list for quite a while. And what this is a report that would come out of committee of the whole that would form part of the council agenda. And it would be items that we don't anticipate any debate, and it would be dealt with in one motion. So what I can do, I will note though, if there is something on that list, and I'll use Jason Barlow's Water Pollution Control Plan annual report. If there was something that Mayor Pankow wanted to discuss on that, he could easily extract that item on the consent report, and it could be voted on separately. So there is some leniency in that, so that you can pull it if you would like to vote on it separately. Here is the draft agenda for council meetings, and you will see that consent agenda is in the middle of that, and that's where you would have a report, and I'll show you that coming up. We have the call to order, the approval of the agenda, which is new. We have been using that in our housing task force and housing advisory committee. disclosure of interest, approval of minutes, council report and updates, delegations and presentations, consent agenda, which is new to us, motions, bylaws, announcements, confirmatory bylaw, which isn't new to us, but we normally just group that in with our bylaw category, as well as adjournment. So regarding the consent agenda, this section, it's section 8, again, spells out what the consent agenda is and how you can extract an item from that to single it out of the consent agenda and how it is dealt with a motion. The clerk shall bring one consent agenda motion forward to pass and receive all the items in that report. And then it goes, there is an invitation to debate, but it can be dealt with in one motion. So if a member wishes to debate any item set forward in the motion, they can separate it from the consent agenda without question or debate. The consent agenda motion shall be voted and adopted separately. Amendments to the separated items may be proposed during the course of debate, and each separated item shall be voted on individually. So even if it is contained in the consent report, it can, if a council member wants that to be extracted, it can be, and like it said, without question or debate. So I stole this from the town of Carleton Place. So you can see this is only one page of their agenda, but you can see where it is dealt with, that the council received the consent report dated April 13th, 2001, and that's number 6 on this sample. And this is the sample of what that report looked like. And it's all the items coming out of the March 23rd Committee of the Whole meeting. And perhaps if there's questions later, I know Councillor Dwyer has been working within this structure for a while and may have some good tips that she can share with us. Again, order of business and general rules for Committee of the Whole. Not much has changed from what we currently do. However, we have added we put the closed session after priority reports, but we have added a provision that that item can be fluid. As you know, sometimes we require the in-camera issues to be dealt with first because they have to be brought out into open session if there is a time sensitivity to it. As well, this is where we've added the committee, board, and external organizational updates. And this is where you would be able to give updates on the hospital board, police services board, things of that nature. Information listing, that would be maybe a listing of any standing items, or you can use the notice of motion, which would be an example if the mayor wanted to inform council that he's going to bring forward discussion on remuneration at the next meeting. So that would be a bit of notice for council that a matter would be coming forward, but that you're not going to be called on it to make an answer that evening with adjournment. Again, quorum, nothing, we haven't changed anything regarding our quorum provisions, recess or adjournment. These are all the same that we currently operate in. But obviously it does need to be included within the context of the procedural bylaw. Motions, nothing has changed regarding the way we handle motions. It will be dealt differently. We won't be doing all the readings for every individual bylaw if council does move forward with a consent format, but nothing has changed regarding motions. As you all know, if a motion is tied, it's considered defeated. We have put in no member shall speak more than once until every member has an opportunity to speak towards a motion. These are all within our current procedural bylaw. We haven't added, this was in our other bylaw as well regarding reconsideration of a motion. So if council wants to revisit, again, we need 2/3 of the vote to bring something forward. To have that reconsidered, as well as the notices of intention to reconsider a motion shall be placed on the next council agenda. And we did that most recently, and I apologize, I can't remember which what item it was, but we did a notice of intention not too long ago. Again, motion to reconsider, none of this has changed from our previous bylaw. Should a motion to reconsider be defeated, the original motion shall remain in force and effect. Recorded votes, we still maintain that provision that any member can request a recorded vote. The members, including the mayor, shall be required to vote unless you're absent in a yay or nay fashion. And anybody who says that they will not vote on an issue, it will be deemed a negative vote. Point of privilege, this is in our current bylaw as well, that if there's a raising of a question that concerns a member or all members, and that a member believes that his rights, immunities, or integrity, or the rights, immunities, or integrity of the group as a whole have been impunged, they can call for a point of privilege, and it takes precedence over any other matters and has to be dealt with immediately. The chair shall decide upon the point of privilege and advise the members of the decision. In my 23 years, we've never had a point of privilege come up, but it is how we are dealing with it is in the procedural bylaw. Point of order, any member may raise a point of order to a violation of rules of procedure. And again, the chair shall decide upon the point of order and advise members of the decision. And unless there's an immediate appeal, the decision of the chair shall be final. If there is an appeal, the chair puts the question to council, and then it's up to council to debate it, and that result shall be final. Bylaws, again, there's nothing in this that's changed with how we do our current bylaws, except the format will change and will be shortened if we do consent agenda. You won't be reading, 10 bylaws a meeting. We still have the confirmatory bylaw within the procedural bylaw. Amendments to the procedural bylaw, obviously we need to give a notice of any intention of amending or repealing any part of this bylaw, and we will review the bylaw at least once every term of council. The schedules, these are some of the things that I'm hoping council will have some discussion on this evening. The inaugural meeting agenda, that's a new provision. Declaration of pecuniary interest is not new. We've had that form in place now for a couple of years. So I haven't added it into the presentation, but that's the handy dandy form that Deputy Clerk Bennett has everybody fill out. If there is a declaration right now, as you know, we have to do it ourselves here due to COVID restrictions. Petition policy is new, so it is incorporated into the presentation. Delegation requests, we have the application process that's been spelled out for a number of years. The staff and council relation policy, that's not new either. And we did a little cheat sheet up for motions, which has been updated from the previous bylaw. So this is the inaugural meeting agenda template. There's the call to order, the roll call, the declaration of office that all of you took. Usually we have either a judge or lawyer do that. The mayor assumes the chair, and then we have some councillor remarks, as well as the mayor's inaugural remarks and appointments to the striking committee if council chooses to have a striking committee. Petition policy, this is the new policy that we put into place after receiving quite a number of petitions in the last couple of years. Council decided that they'd like to see an actual policy in place. So that's what's in front of you this evening, and it's how council will take petitions when they come in. They have to be clear and concise and respectful. There can't be any libelous or false statements. There can't be any criticisms of other people or groups. Must be legible, handwritten. We have to have the identity of the main point of contact, contain the printed name, address, and original signatures written directly on the face of the petition, as well as for if there's an electronic, we do need the name, address, and valid email address because we are going to be accepting e-petitions as well as the vintage handwritten petitions that still circulate. So this is the policy on petitions and how they will be dealt with and how council will deal with petitions, as well as a template petition form for both your handwritten petition as well as your electronic petition form and how they get submitted. So that's new for council's consideration. And the big item for council, at least in my opinion, for council to consider would be whether they wish to continue e-participation when we're out of an emergency context. So the Municipal Act does allow for e-participation. We would have to put procedures in our bylaw, but there is some decisions that council would have to make on this matter. There is definite benefits to e-participation, and please don't let the 3 items and potential benefits, sway your vote on it. The benefits, the reduced travel costs for council member, but the increased flexibility of meetings and increased participation. And I think maybe I should have added increased public participation into the benefits, because I think we've all seen the increase having these meetings live with public watching these meetings. There is challenges though with the area that we're currently in the council chambers. However, that's slated for renovation. Always could be technological disruptions. Sometimes it's difficult to effectively manage a meeting, and I know you all have your different ways of managing meetings. I know Councillor Dwyer mentioned once that she likes using the hand feature in Zoom. So some could perceive that as a challenge. The loss of non-verbal cues or body language is something that you need to think about. The impact to transparency and confidence in the local democracy. The potential of a negative vote. As a clerk, this is one of the bigger areas for me, because if a member is prevented from voting electronically, but they are still present for the purpose of participating, their failure to vote is a negative vote. So council does need to make a decision that if somebody isn't there in person, if they are or are not going to allow them to vote on motions and bylaws. As well, if a council decides to go in a closed session prior to a vote, and council has decided not to allow attendance in the closed sessions, for those attending electronically, something may be shared that could change their vote, and the member who is not in the closed session would be unable to participate. So that's another thing that council is going to have to consider, is how they're going to allow or not allow e-participation in closed sessions. So that's something, we need to think about. Council really needs to think about the parameters that we will or won't allow e-participation. Some of the things that I've seen from other municipalities, they've limited the number of meetings that a council member can participate electronically. We have to we'd like a week's notice if a member wishes to exercise this option. As well, members need to be aware that e-participation is not guaranteed, that they will be present if there's a service interruption or technical issue, your Wi-Fi is not working, then you would not be counted as quorum for that meeting. As well, what methods we would define as electronic, telephone, video, audio, conferencing, etc. As well, we need to have decisions on voting, quorum, and closed session is required. So those are the 3 big items with participation at council. A discussion is warranted for those 3 items. As a reminder, we did purchase the eScribe software, so we are using it now for our agendas and meeting prep. They have the live stream provision, but the cameras and audio equipment is something that we have to purchase. And as well, we're looking at estimated 10 to 15,000 for that equipment. And we also need to be aware that this provision can be expanded to allow town boards and committees to allow for e-participation at their meetings. So when you're having this discussion, please also keep in mind the boards and advisory boards and committees that you sit on, and the membership and their comfort level with e-participation. So that's the quick PowerPoint I did on the procedural bylaw. As always, Nadine are available for questions, but I'm looking forward to some discussion on the bylaw and maybe starting to see a new procedural bylaw shape up.
Thank you very much, Director Costello and Deputy Clerk Bennett. I think there's 2 parts. We've got the report part that was reposted, and that involves the e-participation discussion. And then we've got the meat and potatoes of the proposed bylaws. So why don't, if anybody has any comments on the e-participation side of things, let's open that up now. I think Director Costello, you're going to circulate examples of other electronic meeting provisions, so that research is still ongoing.
I certainly can, yep.
Great. And but if anybody has any comments for tonight, now would be the time e-participation. Councillor Brennan and Councillor Alford.
Thank you for that report. My understanding is we're not going to decide on e-participation tonight. So that, which is fine with me. I mean, but as you know, at a first glance, we've got to remember the number of people that are watching this. I'm really excited that you've got the e-scribe, which really makes it interactive in terms of watching a council meeting afterwards. You can click on whatever item you want. So, and I'd be interested when we come back, when you get some more numbers about how many people are actually watching this. I know we've gotten some pretty impressive numbers in the past. In terms of the boards, it's very convenient for me who doesn't sit on all the boards that are on stream to be able to watch them. The Municipal Heritage Committee, you know, the new committees that we formed, we're on the Councillor Alford and the Planning Committee, and we get sometimes there's a couple hundred people watching that. So the transparency and the accessibility for the taxpayers is fantastic, and I think we need to keep that going. In terms of councillors, I would support being able to go to a meeting if I can't be there. It wouldn't be every, and I like the idea of limiting the number that maybe you could utilize that, but I think that's a really good feature. So those are my early comments on that, and I look forward to talking about it another time. But I think tonight we're really going to be drilling down into the procedural bylaw, so I'll have some comments on that later. But those are my comments on e-participation.
Great, thanks, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Alford.
Yeah, I don't think, and correct me, Director Costello, but eScribe live streaming shouldn't take anything away from our viewership, whether it's boards and committees or council. As many people can watch that, the recording of it or live. So I don't, that's not an issue from my perspective. I am, well, this has been a learning experience going to Zoom. I think that for the most part, us being in the same room when we are undertaking discussions of importance to our community, and I think our community expects us to be there. So again, we're not deciding anything. This is you know, just the opening. I do think that we should make sure that eScribe is fully deployed, in that if you look at the minutes, can I go right to where that discussion took place? I think we should also, with regard to accessibility, access the closed captioning option that is with eScribe. So those are my initial comments, but with regard to how many viewers we're going to have and the public participation and the people that can view it, I don't think that's part of this discussion. This is about us being in the room together. So those are my comments for now, but again, we're not deciding anything tonight. So
Thanks, Councillor Alford. We get Councillor Dwyer and then Mayor Panko.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councillor Alfred. I think we're dealing with two separate discussions, and I don't think anybody is going to vote against moving to a platform that allows for wider distribution of our material within the community. And I think that's really one of the major pros coming out of COVID, you know, is that it has forced our hand to modernize much quicker than perhaps we would have otherwise. With respect to attendance in meetings, I'll be honest, I'm very conflicted over that point. Because one, I think like Councillor Alfred said, it's true, the public expects us to be present in a physical matter at the town hall. But that said, I think that what I have learned moving to a Zoom-based format is that the ability for younger working people to actively participate in local government by running for office becomes much more accessible. and encouraging for us to participate in. It is no longer a struggle for me to race home from my full-time job at the end of the day to participate. If I need to be at the office, I can very quickly switch from my day work to an evening meeting, still at the office. And I think that there are a lot of advantages to having the ability to do that, to recruit different people to the composition of council. And I think that that's going to change the values that we as a council hold when you start changing the demographic. Now, I say that I'm also cognizant of the fact that by moving to an electronic format, you may lose out on people who are less comfortable using the electronic format. And again, that's usually the representation that we have seen on councils. If you look around Lanark County, there's a significant number of retired professionals and some non-professionals that have been holding seats on councils for decades. And transitioning to a digital format for them has been very, very challenging. My last point on that, though, is that I think if we're going to allow a digital format for memberships to participate in, it needs to be an all or nothing. I don't think it makes sense to have the majority of council meeting in person with one person joining in remotely. I think in a session like this, where we are all joining remotely and we are all at the same advantages and disadvantages to participating in the meeting, it makes sense. But to say have Jay, I'm going to use you as an example, Jay joining in from Florida while he's on vacation, and we've got Jay on the screen, I think there's going to be missed opportunity for him to take away the same messages that we are by sitting in the room, and vice versa. So I think that if we're going to allow for e-participation by council members, it needs to be all or nothing.
Thanks, Councillor Dwyer. Mayor Panko.
I really agree with what's been said by my colleagues. And from my perspective, I think reducing barriers to people participating, I think it's probably a positive thing. And if you go back a couple of years ago, I probably would not have been as supportive of the current environment. But once you've lived it for excess of a year, I think we've come to realize that it works very effectively. It may not be ideal, but it's effective. And I also wonder of the possibilities that we may have had people in years past living with physical disabilities that prevent them from getting to the council chambers that may not have run for council purely for that reason. So, I mean, we will be making some decisions later this year regarding accessibility improvements for the council chambers, but it's still that issue of making sure we can reduce barriers and make sure that we can consider people from all walks of life and all places. So I'm interested in, I guess, in advancing the dialogue and potentially participation and working towards a solution that works for everyone.
Thanks, Mayor Panko. Councillor McKenna.
Great discussion. I agree that we need the e-scribe full on. I would say that part of the interest in our council meetings is that there was not a lot else going on in the last year. People couldn't go to too many things. So I don't want to give a lot of credit to our dynamic group here and our riveting discussions. Having said that, I do think that we do need to make some provisions for e-participation of council members. I wouldn't support it being the only option. I think it should be the exception rather than the rule. I would also, as one of your representatives on Lanark County Council, where a lot of those mature elected officials that Councillor Dwyer spoke of are there. The struggles, there were very few members that struggled with Zoom meetings. What we struggled with was being connected with proper and decent Wi-Fi in rural Eastern Ontario. So the issue wasn't the technology in our homes, it was the wireless technology throughout Eastern Ontario, and we are going a long way in improving that. So just to watch the ageism, older workers have have to race home as well as our younger workers. However, so just to wrap up, yes, e-participation and I think we do need, if a council member has to go to Calgary for a meeting or for a holiday and want to participate, absolutely they should. I like that idea. And our struggle is with our accessibility of our building for accessibility. So let's get our buildings open. People with disabilities have been made, have these, and for you, we'll give special, do something unique, and they just want to be part of the mainstream. And so the mainstream is our buildings and our properties are open and accessible to all. And I would welcome that. So a little bit down the middle. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. I know Councillor Allen's having technical difficulties, but she texted me to say that the accessible town hall is important, and she prefers the live meetings. She thinks they're better, and but it is nice to be able to watch the meetings afterwards. I think personally, there's it's been, as somebody with a full-time job, it's been great. I really want to echo Councillor Dwyer's comments. The race down Highway 7 to get to the town hall in the passing lane has been eliminated, which has been great. I think accessibility wise, it's been a lot of pros, but also depending on people's personality types for the subcommittees of council, it's been a big barrier to discussion. There's a real, putting yourself out there the way we do every week is not for everybody, and a lot of the people that join our committees are not up for that. So I'd like to see two parallel conversations happen, one for the council committee of the whole track, and the other for the subcommittee side of things, just so that we do acknowledge the difference between those two. I think the other side of it too is that we want to keep doing some kind of e-meeting regularly, because then that keeps the infrastructure up, it keeps us resilient so that we've got the technology ready to go. So at a moment's notice, if we need to use it again, we're not kind of dusting it off from the 2020, 2021 years. So that it's great. I think we've got, so to summarize, I think we've, well, one last, Councillor Brennan. Did I cut out?
I think Councillor Brennan seems to be having sound issues.
Yeah. Seems to be a going concern. Director Costello?
So the action items I have out of this discussion, I do have some examples and samples from other municipalities, so I'll condense those or consolidate those and send those out to all of you so you can see what provisions other municipalities somewhat comparable to us are doing. Like not all municipalities allow for e-participation, but some do, so I will send those out, as well as get some updated stats for viewership for everyone. And as well, Councillor Alfred brought up a good point about the closed captioning, and I made a note of that. So that is, eScribe does have that portal available. We haven't subscribed to that yet. We've been building up, getting used to the platform, so that there is an extra fee associated with for closed captioning, but that will be included in the 2022 budget. So I have my action items for that portion, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, great. Just one last comment was for the $10,000 to $15,000 budget implication. Personally, I'd prefer to see some kind of a makeshift system where we, if we bought 10 webcams for the town hall for $1,000 and use the existing microphone system, I think that'd be a great compromise instead of outrigging this state-of-the-art system and then renovating the town hall in a year or two and having to pull that out. I think one last action item that I was hearing consensus for is that we want to be going full speed ahead with the eScribe. So whether or not we're deciding how we're going to do e-meetings in the future, we want to see that technology being used to its full potential as soon as possible. So is there anything else for discussion? Councillor Brennan, are you back with us?
No, I'm just having a little problem with my audio. I may have to jump out and come back.
Okay, Councillor
I can
Allen.
hear you now, but yeah, it's in and out.
Councillor McKenna.
Just Ontario municipalities have only been doing this for about a year. I did Google to see what the research is saying on how effective and what are the lessons learned. There's very little research at this point, and we don't know how the public actually feel about it. We're feeling pretty positive about it. We know some, but we don't really know. It's only been a year. So I'm still in favor of it, but I am looking, I'm sure there's some bright researchers that are doing some good work in TV Ontario did a discussion on it, but it was opinions, not research. So I think we can go forward and adapt it as the research comes to light. Thank you.
Okay, great. So with that, seeing no further discussion, we'll move into the procedural bylaw. We'll just go through starting with part 1. That's the definition section. Did anybody have any comments or revisions to suggest on 1.0 definitions? Maybe I'll start it off then. One question I had was with abstaining, is that going to be recorded separately or is it just recorded as a nay on the minutes?
It depends. If you abstain and there's been a call for a recorded vote, if you abstain, it's a negative. So if it's just a regular vote on adopting a terms of reference and you don't vote, that's called a negative vote. So we really don't have, you can't really abstain from voting. And that's a provision we currently have.
Okay, great. That's a good clarification for me. One question I've got is in the definitions, we've got advisory committee, standing committee, local board, task force, and I'm wondering if there are any groups that meet associated with the town that would be outside of those definitions. And the second half of that question, of my question is, can we create a term in the definitions that incorporates council, committee of the whole, and those 4 groups all as one, just for clarity and language in the rest of the document?
So currently there is, so we do have definitions for advisory committees, task force, and I do believe we have committees in each of those categories. If we don't, I certainly would recommend that we keep them in just in case there is, in the not too distant future, council decides to, have another committee of some type. What was the second part of your question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, so the definition of committee in the definitions is just committee of the whole.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if we can have a term like that, because sometimes in the document we use the term committee, but we probably mean standing committee, advisory committee, local board,
I've got you.
task force, etc. So if we could have an umbrella term that would cover everybody and then single out the ones, I think it's great to have all 4 of them in there. I definitely want to keep them, but just to have that umbrella term for clarity of language. Does anybody else have any comments, Councillor Alford?
Just one, and this is not just for this section, but with regard to grammar and punctuation, would it be best, Director Costello, if we just forwarded those to you when we catch them?
Certainly. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other comments on section 1? I'm just scrolling through it here. The last one for me was just for 2/3 vote. Do we need to give more definition to how that would work when there's not a multiple of 3, or is it good the way it is?
I can certainly see if I can expand on that, if it will be helpful. I know it is expanded upon a little bit in the reconsideration of a motion, but I'll make a note, Councillor McGuire, and if I can find an expanded definition, I'd be happy to include it.
Okay, great. That wraps up everything I had for section 1. Anybody else? Seeing nothing, we'll move on to section 2.0 interpretation. Would anybody like to start off this one? Okay, well, I can start off again. In 2.1, we've got proceedings of council.
Mhm.
But this term isn't defined in 1.0, so if we could match that up with, I forget what the term we use is. We've got on 2.3, so the rules, it says, subject to the requirements of the Municipal Act, the rules and regulations contained herein may be suspended by resolution for a single occasion by an affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of the members present and voting, unless otherwise provided by law. And I'm wondering if this is going to give committees the leeway to bypass the procedures, because a member is defined as any member of a committee, subcommittee, etc. So if we, like, could the Municipal Heritage Committee have a motion that they're not going to follow the town's procedural bylaw and have their own process and go that route? Or
Well, they would still have to comply to the requirements under the Municipal Act, so they wouldn't be, that wouldn't be permitted, but the bylaw does pertain to all committees and boards as well.
okay, so is that, I don't know.
So it's saying that there are rules within the procedural bylaw that can be amended by 2/3 for a single solitary subject, but it still can't be it still has to be within the scope of the Municipal Act.
Okay, so like, for example, could the Municipal Heritage Committee say they're going to start meeting in person, have a 2/3 vote, and then they bypass the council procedures, but they're still in accordance with the Municipal Act?
Possibly, that might not be the best example just because of provincial restrictions, but they could suspend with 2/3 vote, they could decide on a different meeting location if you were meeting in person or something of that nature.
Okay.
Or they could have a rotating chair or something.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on this one? I don't know if it's too much of an exception or not, Councillor Alford.
No, I wanted to, if Carrie could give us an example, can you give us an example of a committee doing, what would they do?
I would say, let me see here. An easy example would be something like I'll use the Heritage Committee, that the Heritage Committee with 2/3 of the membership voted that they were going to have a meeting at 7 p.m. instead of the 6 p.m. time slot that they normally have for their publicized meeting. Something like that, something that's deviating from the procedural bylaw. It wouldn't be that they could deviate from something under any other piece of Municipal Act legislation. So whether it be, with 2/3, they can change the, what would be another one? Maybe, because they have a different agenda layouts. That they allow a delegation or 2 delegations or.
So they couldn't say, well, we're not going to, sorry, Mr. Chair. So they can't circumvent something like the code of conduct or the rules of procedures, or there's no trap here.
No,
if someone, okay.
They still have to be in compliance with the requirements of the Municipal Act.
Okay.
But they could come up with their own procedure to their committee meetings, because they wouldn't have to follow the procedural bylaw.
Historically, in Smiths Falls, all boards and committees have used the municipalities council's procedural bylaw. I'm not aware of any board or committee having their own procedural bylaw or procurement bylaw.
Councillor Alford?
Yeah, and having sat on several committees in the last 2 terms that I've been on, I would say that perhaps many of those committees are not familiar at all with what our procedural bylaws are. I know certain councillors would help because a lot of us sit on those committees, but there's no education piece for committee members as to how this all works. That would be one note I would make about that and other things like this. We don't do an education inaugural meeting when they take place to tell them how this all works. It's left up to the committee chair, who's usually new and may not be aware either, in terms of code of conduct or, you know, some of the other procedural things that we have in our bylaw, they're not taught what those are. I'm not even sure if they're circulated to them, to tell you the truth.
They are circulated, but perhaps a provision about a brief orientation for boards and committees once a term.
That might be helpful.
Councillor McGrath.
I see this as fairly low risk. Council appoints the committee members. We appoint decent, hardworking, committed people, and council's represented there. So I see it as a low risk the way it stands.
Okay, it's personally, I'd be more comfortable if it was just council and committee of the whole that had that authority, but I'm not hearing any consensus for that. So is there, if there's no other comments for section 2, we'll move on to section 3. So section 3 principles, anybody want to start off the conversation? Not seeing anything. One comment I've got is 3.2, no item shall be placed on an agenda with respect to a matter which is not within the jurisdiction of council or committee. And I'm wondering if that would stop things like the red shirt day or the 988 emergency number from being added as correspondence items.
Saying that they come from other municipalities requiring support for implementation, I don't think that would change.
Okay, so
Those come to us from municipalities asking clerks to bring them forward to their councils for, to our councils for your attention. So that provision wouldn't change.
okay, Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. I made this comment not in this section, but there was another reference, and when we get to it, I think it'll become obvious, but there was another reference further in the document about limiting inclusion of items on the agenda as they pertain to the jurisdiction of the municipality. And I made the same comment about, you know, I could appreciate that we don't want people coming to council and just talking, you know, about a product they're selling. But when it's something like, for example, the red dress program, to me, there's ample value in having them come directly speak to us, even if it's not necessarily within the jurisdiction of municipal operations or our scope under the Municipal Act, but to be generally receptive to receiving that type of information for information purposes, and to give general support to those opportunities. I think there's value in that. So perhaps it just needs to be a little bit of clarity on the wording about what's permitted and what's not. I don't really know how to do that. I feel like the jurisdiction of the municipality is pretty general, but is it general enough? Like it's hard to say. And part of the procedural bylaw just comes down to the interpretation of the clerk, right? And so knowing that Carrie's interpretation of the policy is that this is what it's intended to say. You know, hopefully we have Carrie for many, many years and that interpretation continues, but you need to have language that's at least like in there and not subject to interpretation where somebody's going to come in and say, no, all of a sudden the red dress is not permitted as a delegation because it's not within our jurisdiction.
Councillor Brennan, then Councillor McGowan.
Yeah, I get that. I think the language here allows for some discretion and some common sense from the clerk and or the mayor. And so things like the red dress or other items that come forward that are sort of things that we want to say we support. There's lots of opportunity for that. So if you want to clean the language up a bit, but I think that the spirit of it is there.
Councillor McGowan.
Oh, I agree with Councillor Dwyer's comments, and I too was going to bring up agenda under a different section 8.1.2. What we don't have anywhere that I could find is how items get chosen to be on the actual agenda itself. There's no conversation anywhere other than the clerk shall have prepared an agenda. And now under that obviously fall within the jurisdiction. So there is no, who gets to set the agenda? Is it council or is it the clerk? So it's a bit of a science and an art. I understand that, but I was going to bring it up later on having a conversation about agendas and how they get set, because we're kind of silent on it in here.
So, oh, sorry, Councillor Dwyer.
Just on that point, I mean, I having read this thoroughly over the weekend, I mean, this is pretty much verbatim the procedural bylaw from Carleton Place. So I think to answer Councillor McKenna's point, the way this functions is that the agenda is set operationally by the CAO and clerk, in some cases the mayor, but if a councillor wanted to bring forward an item for discussion, that's where the notice of motion comes in. And this is a huge departure from how we've been operating. But the idea that if what was Carrie's example earlier, that Mayor Panko wants to raise the issue of remuneration for discussion and debate, he would put forward a notice of motion to give us heads up, and then council would vote on said notice of motion at a consecutive meeting to say, yes, we either will debate it or no, we won't. And then after that, it comes forward for discussion. So it significantly delays our ability to act on things. But there's some sense to that. It shouldn't be an agenda created at the will of council. It should be operational based. And in certain cases, there is a need for council to raise something that warrants discussion, but it delays things significantly.
Okay, so I'm hearing most of the stuff with 3.2 is going to come up later. Let's flag 3.2 so it gets updated with any changes that happen for the report document.
I'd recommend, Mr. Chair, under section 8, where we have the order of business, the template committee of the whole, possibly that might be a good spot to bring that up.
Great. So yeah, let's just flag that so we update it with the future. And if there's no other comments on section 3, we'll get to section 4. Right. So council staff roles and responsibilities. Anybody have? Councillor Alford, then Councillor Dwyer. You're muted.
Sorry. So just a general comment, it comes up here and it comes up again later that when we reference a Schedule B, that the title of Schedule B is also on the schedule that's attached. So that I can go find Schedule B. That comes up a couple of times, once here and once later on. With regard to the content of the role of members of council, I don't have any comment.
Good. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only have one on this section, and I'm hoping it's a point of clarity more than anything else. But Carrie, section 4.1.2 reads that all requests for substantive reports shall be by a committee of the whole directive. Mm-hmm. Under this new format, is the intent to have committee of the whole functioning on a motions-based system. So we will take the recommendation of a staff report, motion it, vote it on the floor, allow for the debate, and then do a final reading and vote for action, because that appears to be how this is written, which in this case, the directive would be a motion. Am I understanding this correctly?
So this clause this clause is in there for requests for reports being a committee of the whole directive. More so, we meant this as a clause that because we've had circumstances where we've had 1 or 2 council members request a report, but we haven't seen consensus across the board, or at least a majority. So this point is supposed to offer clarity for when staff is supposed to act on a request from council, so that we know that there's a clear majority who are requesting it and not 1 or 2 members only for staff to go ahead and undertake a report. So that's where that point comes in.
That's perfect, Carrie. And that's kind of what I was thinking. And to me, there's real value in the way this policy has been rewritten to clean up how council is going to action given direction. Because you're right, too often somebody will say, well, can you follow up on this? And the rest of council doesn't have buy-in, and then it gets lost. But again, when we get down to the motion section, I think we're going to see that the appropriate process, even at committee of the whole, is to read it, vote on it, discuss it, make an amendment if needed, and then give the final vote. And thus the minutes of committee of the whole would significantly reflect a consensus of council on what the direction is. So, I mean, when we get there to debate that, maybe the wording directive just needs to reflect the process identified later in the policy. But in reading this first section, it kind of threw me off what it was that we were actually asking committee to do.
Okay, good point. And you're right. It's something, we just need something put in there so that staff has a clear directive of what should be done and be clear that it was a majority and not just a request from one or two council members.
Councillor McKinnon?
Yeah, I agree with there's no definition of directive, and it isn't this council that we're building this for, it's for future councils. This council actually does, in my opinion, a very good job at reaching a consensus or not and giving direction to staff and checking back. Is that the majority view? Yes, it is. We don't have Lone Rangers giving a lot of direction, and that's a good thing. But in future councils, that may be an issue. So we have to think we're setting the bar for the next, well, future council. So I would like to see a little clarity on what a directive actually is without getting, see, I like some informality. I don't want to have to do motions. If we all do a thumbs up and say, yes, that is the directive, I would hate to have to start over formalizing, but then in the future, the next council, you may need to, so you don't want to, yeah, I think I made my point. Thank you.
Great. So scrolling through here. I'm wondering, so is this just 4.0 is just for council meetings, or is this extrapolated to committee of the whole too, or would this apply to any aspect of the committees, subcommittees, and boards?
These roles and responsibilities cover everything from what your roles are in meetings, as well as what your roles are out of meetings like this. And it's almost, even when you get to the staff portions, it's kind of like a mini job description. So these are excerpts right from, some of these clauses are right from the Municipal Act, Councillor McGuire.
Okay, great. So one thing I know on some of the committees will look at the procedural bylaw to try to get direction, but then when the wording is really focused on council, it's confusing whether it applies to us or not. So I'm wondering if we could change this section to members and staff roles and responsibilities, because it really it seems to kind of dictate how the committee group works and how the staff group works. It's more geared towards Cal, but then at least that generality will give those committees some direction.
So the title, Councillor McGuire?
Yeah, like, would that be better to be members, staff roles and responsibilities, so it opens it up to all groups?
Let me look and see how I can fix that.
Okay. 4.2.1 is the head of council mayor shall be an ex officio member of all committees of council. What does that mean in practice?
They can attend any, that's always been the case with our mayors, that they can attend and vote at any of the committee meetings if they're there. I don't think, and Mayor Panko could probably speak to it. I don't think he's used that provision, if at all, during your terms, Mayor Panko.
No, I haven't. And to the point earlier in the conversation regarding e-participation and the current environment, I mean, that's one of the benefits of having all of our meetings recorded and the ability for any of us to go back in and listen to the discussion after the fact or during the meeting.
By virtue of his title, though, he's permitted to attend any task force committee or advisory board meeting.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't appreciate that before. So cool. 4.3.3 is in the absence of the mayor due to illness or otherwise, the acting mayor shall act in the place. And I'm wondering, my understanding was that we had, like, Councillor McKenna's in a role for emergency circumstances that he would step in, but then we've got the acting mayor position, and I'm wondering how that works with the practice.
For the emergency plan?
Yeah.
We actually, that's a different piece of legislation that the emergency plan has been adopted under. And it's been a practice. I think it's more of a best practice that we only have one person dedicated to that group, just so that there's consistency with the file if it was to change from month to month. And I think COVID is the perfect example that if we had a rotating chair during COVID. It would probably be a little more difficult than having one acting mayor in place during. But that's been the standard for quite some time, and it's the emergency plan is mandated under a different piece of legislation.
Okay, so that language is congruent with the emergency plan. There's no issues there.
No.
Okay. Councillor Allen had a comment on 4.3.8 about the chair can't debate. 4.3.8 is the chair may answer questions and comment in a general way, but if the chair wishes to participate, make a motion, speak to a motion, or leave the chair for any other reason, the chair must first delegate the duties of the chair to a member of council. I think that's a pretty big departure from how we're operating now.
Yes.
Is there anybody want to start the debate on that? Councillor Alfred, Councillor Dwyer?
Yeah, that's one I'm not in favor of at all.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think everybody's of that opinion.
Oh, good. Does everybody hold the same opinion?
Yeah.
I don't, I think, now the chair, we could say that the chair goes last to speak or something of that nature, but that every member not be able to participate in the debate I would not be in favor of that.
Councillor Dwyer, and Councillor Allen's got sound now.
I'll be honest, I've always thought this was a really dumb provision because in practice, you get a chair who does have opinions, because of course they do. Why else would they run for council? And so they do this funny little dance where they'll turn the chair over to somebody else. And honestly, it's just a waste of time. Like, just let council debate for the sake of debating. That's why we're here. But I agree with Councillor Alfred's option, actually, that the chair hold their opinion and speak last, because I think their first duty as chair is to conduct the meeting. That's their job. And for the sake of, allowing free debate and facilitating, Robert's Rules of Order, by all means, they should maybe hold their opinion to the end. But when you see this in practice, it's really dumb.
We had Councillor Allen, and then.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't think any of us ever do that on committees and boards that we're on. If I'm acting chair or even participating in that role, I do that. I listen to everybody, and oftentimes I just have to nod my head or whatever, and we have agreement. Or I speak last, but I've never, that's why I question that. The write-up of that whole thing, I don't remember us ever doing that in the time I've been a councillor.
It is.
And I don't see the need of it. I really don't think it's that critical for us to do it any other way.
Good. Councillor Brennan, Councillor McKenna, and then back to Councillor Alfred if Mayor Panko, you don't have anything.
Yeah, we don't need that in there. And that's not been the practice, as we all know. We're all, although we don't agree on everything, whenever someone's chair, it's always been the practice, and every one of you have done the same thing. Let everyone speak, but of course, you're going to have an opinion. But to formalize it, and I'm going to pass the chair over to Councillor Dwyer while I speak. Well, yeah. that's silly. And you may want to put something in that if you want to put something in, like, if the chair wants to speak, the chair should speak last. But I think that goes to the next one as well. The chair shall not resume the position of the chair until the chair has finished debating the issue. I mean, that's a little pompous. So I think we should take that stuff out.
Yeah, I agree.
Councillor McKenna?
I'm okay with taking it out, but I do understand why it's there. The chair of the committees, and this group again is exemplary in how they behave. Future councillors, the chair has a lot of authority and can move a discussion by allowing their favorite speaker to speak first. And it can happen. You have to just think about a contentious issue and if a split council and you start, the chair has influence over how the outcome of the meeting can go. So I just caution us to Now, that's where your points of privilege and points of order are really important to understand how that works, but just, I understand why it's there. I wouldn't refer to it as silly. It's there for a reason, but I'm okay with it being taken out and worded differently. I just caution us a little bit.
Mayor Penko and then Councillor Alfred.
Yeah, I mean, like Councillor McKenna, I understand the merits of having it in there and the risk of a chair taking in the opportunity to truly dominate the discussion to the point of potentially suppressing discussion from other members. And I think it's easy for us to get caught up in our current environment where we tend not to, we don't have those issues. But I guess to Councillor McKenna's points, it doesn't mean they can't happen in the future. So, I mean, I agree with majority of my colleagues that it's something that is not, it seems like an extra step and an unnecessary step. So I tend to agree with the removal of it. I guess my tempered thoughts are we simply want to make sure that we definitely don't want to muzzle a chair, obviously. We want to make sure that there is fair and equitable distribution of time and discussion among all members. So I guess to Director Costello, I guess maybe a rewording of that. And I think the suggestion that the chair speak for potentially first or last, so that there is plenty of opportunity for discussion among all members of committee.
Director Costello.
I've made a note here. I will revisit those two provisions, but I would remind council that we do have to, kind of follow Robert's Rules of Order. So I will, do my research in there, and I'll do some research with other municipalities to see if we can soften that provision somewhat. But Councillor McKenna is right. There is a reason that provision is in there, but I will see what I can do to massage that one a bit.
Councillor Alfred, and then if we're good, we'll move on to.
Yeah, I would just bring to Director Costello's attention 4368. Maintain an appearance of impartiality on all matters. That so that may, if they're going to have an opinion and not have to vacate the chair, you may have to massage that one too.
Okay, great. So Director Costello, we've got clear direction on that one.
I do.
Great. I was wondering, 4.3.11, we've got represent council initiatives and decisions to the public where appropriate, but where would the acting mayor be in that kind of a position? Like, it's one thing to do the representation, it's another thing to be the spokesperson for the municipality. And
an example I would use if Mayor Panko was away on vacation and there had to be global news was in town wanting a statement on a decision council made, that you would be doing the interview and expressing what the decision of council was, not your own personal opinion, whether it would have been for or against the initiative that was brought forward.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's something I wouldn't have an issue with today, but down the road, who knows? Councillor Brendan?
Just as an anecdote, I had to do that once and the subject was bird feeders. It was a lot of fun.
Councillor Dwyer?
You're welcome.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that's the scenario where you pray that Sean is still answering his phone on vacation, because none of us have media training. Like, that's, if we were ever in that case, like, okay, Peter does, I have a little bit, but like the majority of us are not trained for media training. Like, that's where you use your discretion and deflect to staff. Staff can make the comment, especially CAO Morris, but yeah, just pray Sean's answering his phone.
If he's not, call Malcolm.
Maybe put a May in there. May represent. Okay, so. Oh, there's some, so 4.5.7 is there's a lot of language included in the next regular meeting. And I'm just, if we want to take out regular for that, because we have so many special meetings these days, like we'll have cows that'll lead into councils and etc. So I think if we can.
Okay.
Councillor Dwyer.
Sorry, I'm flipping between two devices here. If we're moving on to 4.5, which I gather we are, Carrie, the section 4.5.10 speaks to the delegation of authority to place housekeeping or consolidated bylaws directly on the agenda. I think we need a definition of what housekeeping constitutes.
Oh, good.
And I think, and I made this comment again elsewhere in the document, but I think when we start getting into the consent agenda items, there may be a trigger for updates and consolidation with the delegated authority bylaw to give staff the delegated authority to make the determination of what's going on and what's not.
No, excellent point. And the delegation of authority bylaw will follow this one, which will give some clarity to, I guess, what we would consider housekeeping, but that's a great point, Councillor Dwyer.
Great. So that wraps up my comments before. Councillor Alford, you've got some more?
Just 4.5.9, we say that have provided that if they have a desire to be notified of a particular subject matter, that they have provided email contact information for same. Can we make that a little broader than just email?
Which provision is that?
4.5.9.
Okay, so just provide contact information, not specifically email?
Yeah, you don't want to inhibit, because somebody doesn't have an email address, then they not be able to participate.
Okay.
That's a great point. Any last calls for section 4 before we go to section 5? Okay, great. We're cruising right along. So section 5 is rules of conduct for members, staff, and attendees. Anybody? Councillor Dwyer?
I have one under section 5.2, unless somebody has something under section 5.1. But I made the note that when 2 or more members wish to speak, the chair shall name the member who speaks first. And I'd flagged that this section doesn't deal with members of the public wishing to speak. And it's not uncommon, particularly on development applications, where there will be a general acceptance by the chair and quorum of council to allow a representative from the proponent to speak or answer questions specific to council. And I just wondered if we should add some wording that's a little bit more general to reflect that, you know, provided the discretion of the chair allows, that members of the public may be invited to speak as well. And this, again, this gets into kind of the difference later on in the policy about public meetings versus delegations versus deputations, which are not actually even referred to in the policy, but are used by some municipalities. I mean, a delegate would generally just be a member of the public who's coming to speak to an item on the agenda. Is it our interpretation that that's only going to occur at the beginning of the meeting, or are delegates going to be recognized as somebody speaking to a priority item? And I just, when I read this, I don't think that's been contemplated.
No, that is a good point. So I can offer some clarity around the speaking at meetings, and we can add a provision for public wishing to speak. And I think there is a provision in our current bylaw that a majority vote of council that somebody from the public would be permitted to speak.
Sorry, I have one brief follow-up to Mr. Chair. The other thing I noted was that there is no contemplation in the policy about staff being invited to speak. And again, seeing this format executed in other municipalities, I'll be honest, typically staff don't actually speak. You present your item in writing, and it's expected that council will review it. And if they have questions, they will call upon you. But that has not been our practice here. And so if it is our intent to continue that practice, then I think it needs to be noted.
I think that's a great point, Councillor Dwyer. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I like when staff have opportunity to speak. I mean, just thinking about some of the things that we require Troy to add, you know, his expertise to, or someone else with expertise, I think that should be added. I like to do that.
Great. So I'm seeing nodding heads in support of that one. Councillor Dwyer.
Sorry, one last point. It's actually not my preference to have staff speaking. I think if staff have presented the written report, that's the record, that's their professional opinion. And quite frankly, usually it's better thought through than comments verbally at the meeting. Or alternatively, we just get a regurgitation of what's already been written in the report. My suggestion would be that we invite staff